Hello, today I'm going to shake it up and I'm actually doing a wire wrapping tutorial. So I've done a couple of these, but not nearly enough to have a fancy setup. So we're just gonna go with the front facing camera here today. And here's an example of what I'm gonna make. And so this is basically just a little bead on a wire wrapped bail. And a bail, B-A-I-L, is what a little piece of jewelry hangs on. So I'm going to show you how to make this nice, neat little circle and how to attach the bead to it. Now this one's actually going to be for a knitting stitch marker. And so I made a really nice big top. But you can really, the possibilities for this are endless. You can make them for earrings and then attach them to a little earring wire. You can make a pendant out of this. You can really do anything. So first you'll need some wire, and really any size wire is gonna work totally fine. Just make sure your bead fits onto the wire. So you need your wire. I did about 3 inches. You can measure it, but I kind of just eyeballed it because I know how I'm gonna use a pretty small bead overall. So I don't need that much wire. You'll need cutters, of course, to clip your wire, and then you'll need round nose and flat nose pliers. If you have 2 sets of the flat nose, that can be really helpful. I actually have these ones which are really soft so they don't damage the wire, which would be nice but isn't necessary. Okay, so also if you're making this to be a knitting stitch marker, you'll need a knitting needle just to make sure you get it to an appropriate size. Now I'm making these for a project where I'm using size 5 needles, and so I'm actually using a size 8 to wrap around to check the size to make sure it slides easily on my size 5. So I have all my materials: bead, wire, pliers, and then a knitting needle if you want it to be a very specific size. And you'll want to start off with your round pliers and your wire, and you want to go about a third of the way down the wire. Somewhere between a third and a half is going to work well. You want that longer end to be towards the bottom, and then you're going to bend it not quite at a right angle, but pretty close. So you can see it's still pointing up, like the angle is a little bit, what do you call that? Obtuse. So that once you've made that first bend, I'll zoom forward, and I've got this nice dark shirt here, so you should be able to see pretty easily. Once you have that first bend, you're then going to take your round nose pliers and you're going to put them going this direction and here. So you're lining them up vertically like this, and then you're going to pinch your wire vertically here. And then you're going to take this top wire, the shorter one, and wrap it around the top of your pliers. Now, if you wanted to make this really small and dainty, like for an earring, maybe you might want to wrap it really tightly. Depends on how big you want that hole to be at the top. Since I want this to be bigger and fit my knitting needle, I'm not gonna pull it really tightly around the pliers. So then I am gonna use the knitting needle to make sure this is an appropriate size. I'm just kind of pinching it around like this, and then I'm gonna pull it all the way around the knitting needle to make that nice circular shape. Like I said, if I was making it smaller, I would actually just use my pliers and pull it around that. But since these pliers are pretty teeny, I don't want it to be that small. Okay, so now what I've got is something that looks like this. And you want this wire, the one you just wrapped, to be coming out pretty straight. And now it does really want to be a right angle, because then when you wrap this around, to make it neat, we're kind of trying to avoid gaps here. It's easy if this is like way down like this, you see you kind of get that awkward gap between that nice angle you made before and what's going to wrap around. And that's going to make it look pretty messy. So you want to bend it up so that it's really coming out perpendicular, and you'll almost see that little right angle here. Okay. So that is our first step there to making it look really neat. I've got my nice circle and a right angle with that wire there. Then I'm going to take my flat pliers, and actually I'll use these ones, and I'm going to just kind of grip that really tightly, and then I'm going to pass this, keep it closed. I'm going to hold it in my right hand, and I'm gripping it. You can see I'm having this kind of come out here. You don't want it to be way too close, because we're going to try to pull this wire around with our hands, our fingers. So you don't want it way out here either, because it's going to fall off. So, about halfway down the circle, and then pass it into your other hand your non-dominant hand and hold it pretty strongly there. Okay, then you can take your hand and your dominant hand, and as I'm going to wrap this, I'm going to make sure I'm pushing up, okay? Because if you, like I said, if you pull it down away from the circle this direction, you're going to get that gap again. So as we are wrapping it, you can see I'm putting pressure with my pointer finger, and then I'm going to keep pushing, and then oh, it kind of slid out, so I'm going to readjust with my left hand on the pliers. I'm going to push, and I'm pushing towards the circle, and you kind of can just wrap it around, and you will have a chance later to tighten it with pliers, but the neatest you can make it at every stage is going to help you. So we're just going to keep wrapping it. I like to kind of, so at this point, do you see here that it's not super tight? You can kind of see right there, there's a little gap between like the center wire that I'm wrapping it around and the wire I'm using to wrap. So at this point, I'm actually going to take some other pliers, and you can't really see because of the angle I have to do it at, but I'm going to squish this closed with pliers. And as I'm going, so I don't want to get too far in before I squish it. If I do all the way 3 times around before I start squishing it in, it's not going to be very neat. So now you can kind of see I've squished it. I've used the pliers to just squish right around that circle to make it nice and tight. And so as you're going, you can kind of use your other, this is why I like to have 2 pairs of flat pliers. You can do this with your round pliers, but the flat pliers make it easier. So as I'm going, I'm gonna wrap it with my fingers and then use the pliers to really smush it in. And I wish I could show you more detailed what I'm doing, but really I'm just kind of attempting to make it really nice and neat. And you'll kind of see where you can push to close up the gaps. And I also, while I was doing that, I did use the pliers kind of like this to push my wraps up towards the circle again as well. And then again, wrapping it around with my fingers. And then actually that one was pretty good. So I didn't really even need to tighten it because I wrapped it around really close to that center wire. And since I'm going to later bring this wire up and wrap it back around, you don't need it to look perfect at the bottom of your wrap, and you also don't want to wrap it too far. So I would go for 2, 3 at the maximum times around. So you can see we've got 3 here, but if I look on this side, it's kind of 2.5. So I don't want to go further than 3 before I'm going to clip that excess. And when I clip it, I want to clip it nice and close to the center wire so I don't have too much extra. Oh, it's really short, so it's kind of hard to clip. It's like, okay, there we go. So I clipped that wire. And then again, I'll take my other pair of flat pliers, and you can see that end is kind of, ooh, where are we? You can see that end is kind of poking out still. I'm going to take my flat pliers and just really squish it down so that it's nice and tight. And you can kind of go all the way around and just kind of, I'm turning this as I squish it just to make it nice and round and nice and even and flat. And so there we are. Now you can see a little, there we go. You can see that there's like a tiny gap here between like these 3 and like the top of where that angle goes. It's really, really minimal, but I'm a perfectionist. So I'm gonna put my pliers like one through the hole and one at the bottom of those wraps. And then I'm gonna put pressure on underneath and then just kind of push it up. So that just tightens it up very minimally, just to try to get it, that gap is still there, but it's really minimal. So it looks really nice. So that's kind of the main part of the tutorial here, is how to make that top look really neat. Key things are to make that little bend before you start, not quite a right angle, so that you've got that little bend here makes it look really neat and circular, which is important. And then as you're wrapping, tighten it with another pair of pliers as you go so that it's just really close and those wraps are really nice and neat. Okay, so then we've got this lovely little bail with a wire at the end. I'm gonna take my bead, pop my bead on there. And then, you know, at this point, you could really just like make a little circle at the, you know, cut it close, make a little circle at the bottom and call it good. But to make it really cool and swirly, what I'm going to do is use kind of pushing the bead down so I don't have any gap above the bead. I'm gonna take this wire and just bend it to one side, kind of like that. And then I want to keep it nice and tight as I go, but I'm just actually gonna swirl it around like that. And as I'm going, the top's gonna want to bend over, so I kind of keep adjusting the angle of the top so it doesn't like bend over too far and I don't have a lot of gap. And then I'm just gonna keep kind of twisting it around and making a little circle. And so I do this part really with my fingers, but if you notice that it's like way too big, you can take your round pliers at this point, put it in the center of that circle and kind of twist it around to tighten up if you weren't able to get it very tight with your fingers. So you can see now coming out of the bottom of the bead, I've got that cute little spiral, and you can also see that top's pretty crooked. You will be able to fix that at the end once you've made it, so don't be too, you know, perfectionist at this point. Once the bottom wire is secured, you'll be able to kind of mess with it, and you know, each one is going to be unique, and that's kind of part of the fun as well. So I like to make it come around twice. So I make that first circle, and then I go around one more time, and on that second, so you can see there's kind of 2 layers of spiral there. On that second time around, I'm going to bring the wire to the top where I made those first wraps, and I'm then going to, again, I want to kind of put pressure, oh, too much pressure. Put pressure as I'm wrapping it around. And at this point, it can be really helpful to kind of doing the same thing we did from before. Take your flat pliers, hold the bail. The bail is that circle at the top. Hold the bail on the pliers, switch it to your left hand, and then use your fingers to wrap it around. Try to keep it tight against that the first coil. But then once I've made one wrap around, I'm gonna take the pliers, kind of squeeze it in. And then again, with my left hand or your non-dominant hand, hold the bail in the pliers and wrap that extra wire around. And there's no hard and fast rule for how many times to wrap it around, but I tend to go for 3 because it looks pretty neat. And at this point, I actually didn't have a ton of extra wire, so I'm just gonna take it ends up looking like that. And you can see I've got about 2.5 wraps around, and then that little bit that's sticking up there, I can just take my flat pliers and kind of squish it back down so it's nice and neat in there. And if you're feeling really extra perfectionist that day, you can take a nail file or a metal file if you have one and like file down the edges. But if you just squish it in enough and make sure that it's not poking out, it'll be fine, and it won't be pokey or catch on your clothes or anything or your knitting. Okay, so now I finished that basically, and you can see it's got that cute little spiral and a nice big top, and now I've got 2 that pretty much match. Super fun. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions about that, and enjoy your beading.